Welcome to the most terrifying collection of true Appalachian rest stop horror stories you'll ever hear. I'm your narrator for tonight's journey into the darkest corners of America's mountain highways, where rest stops become gateways to encounters that will change everything you thought you knew about what's hiding in our forests. Before we begin, I need you to do something. Right now, drop a comment below telling me exactly where you are in the world and what time it is as you're listening to this. Are you driving through the mountains yourself? Home alone at 3 a.m.? Camping somewhere remote? I want to know who's brave enough to listen to these stories and where in the world you are when the fear sets in. Comment your location and time right now. I read every single one, and your comments help these stories reach more people who need to know what's really happening on our highways. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. These are real accounts from real people: maintenance workers, state troopers, truck drivers, emergency responders, individuals who've encountered something in the Appalachian Mountains that official reports will never document. Over the past year, I've collected testimonies from men and women who've worked the night shifts, patrolled the empty highways, and maintained the facilities that most travelers only see in daylight. Each person contacted me after seeing my previous videos, sharing experiences they have never told anyone else because they knew no one would believe them. Tonight, I'll be narrating each story exactly as it was told to me. 6 bone-chilling encounters from 6 different people, all connected by one terrifying truth. There are things living in the deep forest of Appalachia that look human, but definitely aren't. These entities study us, mimic us, and sometimes they recruit us. Our first account comes from Robert Hayes, a maintenance supervisor who spent 19 years keeping West Virginia's rest stops clean and safe. Robert contacted me 3 months after being forced into early retirement, desperate to share what he witnessed at the Beckley Rest Area. Here's his story, in his own words. I never believed in monsters. After 19 years maintaining rest stops for the West Virginia Department of Transportation, I'd encountered plenty of strange people: hitchhikers, drifters, folks running from their problems, but nothing that wasn't human. That changed last October at the Beckley Rest Area when I met something that looked like people, but definitely wasn't. Robert Hayes is my name, and I'm recording this because what I saw needs to be documented. The state forced me into early retirement and made me sign confidentiality agreements, but I can't stay quiet about this anymore. The Beckley Rest Area sits at mile marker 44 on Interstate 77, nestled deep in a hollow where ancient mountains block out most of the sky. The facility serves maybe 200 vehicles on busy days, but after midnight, it's usually dead quiet except for the occasional long-haul trucker. That's when they come out of the forest. October 13th started normal enough. I was working the overnight maintenance shift when I heard voices outside around 1:30 in the morning. Sounded like a family talking, maybe travelers letting their kids stretch their legs after hours in the car. Through the restroom window, I could see 4 people standing near the picnic tables, 2 adults and what looked like children, all wearing clothes that seemed a bit old-fashioned, but nothing too unusual for folks passing through rural West Virginia. What caught my attention was how still they were standing. No movement, no fidgeting, just 4 silhouettes, perfectly motionless in the dim security lighting. I grabbed my flashlight and walked outside to check on them. Sometimes families traveling at night need directions or have car trouble, and part of my job is basic customer service. As I got closer, I called out a friendly greeting. "Evening, folks. Everything all right out here?" All four turned toward me in perfect unison, moving like they were connected by invisible strings. That's when I got my first good look at their faces. They looked human at first glance. 2 adults, a teenage boy, and a younger girl. But something was wrong with their features. The proportions were slightly off, like someone had tried to sculpt people from memory, but gotten the details wrong. Their eyes were too large and too dark, taking up more of their faces than eyes should. Their mouths were too wide, stretching nearly from ear to ear when they smiled, and they were all smiling at me with identical expressions. "We're just resting," the woman said. Her voice sounded normal, but it seemed to come from somewhere behind her rather than from her mouth. I tried to keep the conversation casual while backing slowly toward the building. "Are you folks traveling far? Need any information about road conditions ahead?" "We live nearby," the man replied, gesturing toward the dark forest surrounding the rest area. "In the old places, back in the trees." The children hadn't spoken yet, but I could hear them making soft humming sounds in harmony with each other. The sound raised goosebumps on my arms. "Well, you're welcome to use the facilities if you need them. Vending machines are working if you want snacks or drinks." "We don't need food," the teenage boy said, and when he spoke, I could see that his teeth were all the wrong shape. Too pointed, too many of them, arranged in rows like a shark's mouth. That's when I decided to end the conversation and get back inside the building. I retreated to the maintenance office and watched them through the security monitors. The 4 figures remained motionless by the picnic tables for another 20 minutes, just standing there like statues. Then they began to change. It started with their posture. They grew taller, their limbs stretching until they were grotesquely elongated. Their clothes seemed to melt away, revealing skin that was mottled and bark-like. Their faces became even more distorted, eyes growing larger while their mouths opened to show rows of needle-sharp teeth. But the most disturbing part was that they were still smiling. Even as they transformed into something nightmarish, they maintained those impossibly wide grins. I called my supervisor, Jim Crawford, at home, waking him up at 2 in the morning. "Jim, I've got a situation at Beckley. There are some people here, but I don't think they're actually people." "Bob, are you feeling all right? You sound stressed." "I'm watching them on the security cameras right now. They're changing, transforming into something else. Their arms are getting longer, their faces are stretching. Bob, I'm going to need you to calm down and tell me exactly what you're seeing." I described the transformation I was witnessing, but even as I spoke, I could see Jim wasn't going to believe me. Who would? "I'm sending someone to relieve you early. Go home, get some rest, and we'll talk about this tomorrow." The replacement maintenance worker arrived around 3 a.m. By then, the creatures had melted back into the forest, moving on those unnaturally long limbs with a fluid grace that no human could match. I showed him the security footage, but the cameras had somehow malfunctioned during the entire encounter. Nothing but static on the recordings from 1:30 to 3 a.m. The next morning, Jim Crawford called me into his office. He had a file folder on his desk, marked confidential, and a serious expression I'd never seen before. "Bob, you're not the first person to encounter the forest dwellers at Beckley. We've had reports going back to when the rest area first opened in 1978. Forest dwellers. That's what the local Cherokee called them, back before the mountains were settled. Creatures that look like people, but aren't. They mimic human appearance to get close to travelers, especially children." Jim opened the file and showed me dozens of incident reports. Maintenance workers, state troopers, even travelers had encountered the creatures over the decades. The reports all described the same things: humanoid figures with wrong proportions, voices that didn't match their mouths, and the ability to transform into something more obviously monstrous. What do they want? I asked. Nobody knows for sure. They don't seem to hurt people directly, but families who encounter them often report missing time, or children who act strangely afterward. Some kids have disappeared entirely after meeting the forest dwellers. Why isn't this information public? Because it would cause panic and shut down a major interstate corridor. The tourism industry alone would lose millions, so the state handles it quietly, transfers employees who see too much, and keeps the reports classified. Jim explained the unofficial protocol for dealing with the creatures. Never approach them alone, never let children get close to them, and never, under any circumstances, follow them into the forest. They're more active during certain moon phases, he said. New moon seems to be their favorite time. That's when most encounters happen. I asked what would happen if I reported what I'd seen to the media or posted about it online. Your employment would be terminated immediately, your pension would be forfeit, and you'd face criminal charges for violating state security protocols. The story would be discredited, and you'd be painted as mentally unstable. The message was clear: keep quiet or face severe consequences. October 31st was my last shift at Beckley Rest Area. Halloween night, and the new moon was rising over the mountains. I should have called in sick. Around midnight, they came out of the forest in larger numbers than I'd ever seen. Not just 4 this time, but dozens of them. They emerged from the tree line in a coordinated group, all wearing the faces of different families, but moving with that same unnatural synchronization. They filled the parking area, standing perfectly still and silent, all facing the building where I was watching from behind the security glass. Their 2 wide smiles were identical, their oversized eyes reflecting the parking lot lights like mirrors. One of them, wearing the appearance of a middle-aged woman, approached the building and pressed her face against the window. When she spoke, her voice came from right behind me, even though she was outside. "We know you've been watching us, Robert Hayes. We know you've been talking about us." I submitted my retirement paperwork the next morning. Jim Crawford processed it immediately, along with the confidentiality agreements and a surprisingly generous early retirement package. The official reason for leaving was listed as health concerns related to workplace stress. The real reason is that I couldn't continue working at a place where creatures from the deep forest come to study human behavior and occasionally recruit new members for their community. If you're traveling Interstate 77 through West Virginia and you stop at the Beckley Rest Area after dark, be very careful who you talk to. If you see people who seem just a little bit wrong, proportions slightly off, smiles too wide, voices that don't match their mouths, don't engage with them. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you to follow them back into the forest. Some of the families they're wearing as disguises used to be real people. This is Robert Hayes, and that's all I'm ever going to say about what lives in the woods around Beckley. The second testimony is from Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell of the West Virginia State Police. 21 years of highway patrol taught her to handle any situation until she encountered something at the Mossy Oak Rest Area that no police academy training could have prepared her for. You know how some people say they can sense when they're being watched? I never put much stock in that until I started patrolling the mountain sections of Interstate 77. There are stretches of highway where you can feel eyes on you from the forest, even though you can't see anything moving between the trees. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell West Virginia State Police, 21 years of highway patrol, and I thought I'd seen everything until last month at the Mossy Oak Rest Area. Now I know there are things in these mountains that have been watching us a lot longer than we've been watching them. This isn't going in any official report, but it needs to be documented somewhere. November 8th, around 3:30 in the morning, I got a dispatch call about suspicious activity at Mossy Oak Rest Area. Multiple reports of people moving through the parking lot in the middle of the night, some kind of gathering that was making other travelers nervous. The rest area sits in one of the deepest hollows along I-77, where the mountains close in so tight you can barely see stars through the canopy. Cell service is spotty. Backup is 40 minutes away, and it's the kind of place where anything could happen without witnesses. When I pulled in, I saw what looked like a family reunion happening in the picnic area. Maybe 20 people of various ages, all gathered around the tables like they were having some kind of meeting. Nothing obviously wrong with that, except it was nearly 4 a.m. and none of them had vehicles. I approached the group with my flashlight and standard greeting. "State Police, can I ask what brings everyone out here tonight?" They all turned to look at me at the exact same moment, like they'd rehearsed it. Men, women, children, elderly folks, a complete cross-section of ages. But as my flashlight played across their faces, I started noticing details that made my hand drift toward my service weapon. None of them were blinking. Not one person in the entire group. They just stared at me with perfectly motionless eyes while wearing identical, polite smiles. "We're having a family gathering," one of the women said. Her voice was pleasant enough, but it seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. I tried to keep the conversation normal while assessing the situation. "That's nice. Are you folks from around here?" "We live in the forest," an elderly man replied. "We've been here much longer than the roads." The children in the group hadn't spoken yet, but I could hear them making soft clicking sounds with their tongues. The noise was rhythmic, almost like some kind of communication. "I'll need to see some identification," I said, which is when things got strange. Every single person reached into their pockets simultaneously and pulled out driver's licenses, but when I examined them under my flashlight, they were all blank. Not expired, not fake, completely blank pieces of plastic. "These aren't valid IDs," I told them. "They're just blank cards." "Are they?" the woman asked, tilting her head at an angle that was just a little too far to be comfortable. "We see them as complete." I looked at the cards again, and for just a moment, they seemed to shimmer with information. Names, addresses, photos that looked almost right, but somehow wrong. Then they went back to being blank. That's when I noticed their feet. Everyone in the group was wearing shoes, but the footwear didn't match their bodies. Old-fashioned boots on people dressed in modern clothes, high heels on children, work boots on elderly women. Nothing fit properly. I called for backup on my radio, but got nothing but static. The group watched me attempt to communicate with increasing interest, their heads all tilting at that same unnatural angle. "Your technology doesn't work well here," one of the men said. "The forest interferes with electronic devices." "The forest doesn't interfere with radio signals," I replied, trying to maintain professional composure while my instincts screamed that these weren't people. "This forest does," a child said, speaking for the first time. When he opened his mouth, I could see that his tongue was forked like a snake's. I decided it was time to end the encounter and call for backup from a different location. "I'm going to need everyone to disperse and head home. Rest areas aren't for gatherings after hours." "We understand," the woman said. "We'll return to our homes in the deep forest. The group began moving away from the picnic area, but instead of heading toward any parking lot or road, they walked directly into the tree line. Within seconds, they had disappeared completely into the darkness between the trees. I followed them to the edge of the forest and shined my flashlight into the woods. Nothing. No sound of people moving through underbrush, no voices, no trace that 20 people had just walked into the forest. I spent the next hour searching the area and trying to make sense of what I'd encountered. The blank driver's licenses were real. I still had them in my possession, but there was no evidence that a large group had been using the picnic area. No trash, no disturbed ground, no indication of human activity. When I finally got my radio working again, I reported the incident as a routine dispersal of loiterers, but I kept the blank IDs as evidence of something I couldn't explain in an official report. 3 days later, I received a visit from my supervisor and a man in a civilian suit who introduced himself as a specialist in unusual incidents. The specialist, who never gave me his name, was surprisingly well informed about what I'd encountered. He had a file folder filled with similar reports from state police, park rangers, and Forest Service personnel throughout the Appalachian region. They call themselves the Deep Forest People, he explained. They've been living in the remote mountains for generations, possibly centuries. They're very good at mimicking human appearance and behavior, but they're not quite human themselves. What do they want? They're curious about us. They study human behavior, sometimes interact with travelers, occasionally recruit new members for their communities. Most encounters are harmless, but there have been disappearances. He showed me photographs of missing persons who had last been seen at mountain rest areas, families who had stopped for breaks and simply vanished, leaving their vehicles and possessions behind. The important thing, the specialist continued, is that these encounters remain classified. Public knowledge of the Deep Forest People would cause widespread panic and potentially dangerous attempts to hunt them down. Are they dangerous? Not directly, but they have capabilities we don't fully understand. They can influence electronic equipment, create illusions, and they seem to exist partially outside normal space and time. Families who encounter them often report missing hours or days. I asked what would happen to my report about the incident. It will be reclassified as a routine patrol contact with transient individuals. The blank IDs will be filed as evidence in an ongoing investigation that will never be resolved. The specialist left me with a direct phone number to call if I encountered the Deep Forest People again, along with strict instructions to avoid prolonged contact and never follow them into the woods. Since then, I've had 3 more encounters with them during night patrols. Each time, they appear in different human forms, but with the same unnatural behaviors, the synchronized movements, the voices that echo from the wrong directions, the 2 wide smiles that never change. I've learned to recognize the signs: electronic equipment malfunctioning, the feeling of being watched from the forest, and that particular quality of silence that falls over the mountains when they're nearby. If you're traveling through Appalachian rest areas at night and you encounter friendly people who seem just a little bit wrong, be polite, but don't engage. And whatever you do, don't follow them when they head back into the woods. They've been perfecting their human disguises for a very long time, but they haven't gotten them quite right yet, and I'm not sure we want to see what they really look like underneath. This is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, and this is all I'm authorized to say about what's living in our forests. Danny Rodriguez spent 12 years as an emergency medical technician, saving lives along Kentucky's mountain highways. But the call he received at Pine Ridge Rest Area wasn't about saving anyone. It was about discovering that 30 people had been replaced by something that was learning to be human. Some calls you never forget. After 12 years running emergency medical services in rural Kentucky, I've seen car wrecks, heart attacks, overdoses, all the usual tragedies that happen along mountain highways. But there's one call that still wakes me up at night, and it didn't involve any normal kind of medical emergency. Danny Rodriguez here. I used to work ambulance services, covering the rest stops along Interstate 75 through the Daniel Boone National Forest. Used to, because after what happened at Pine Ridge Rest Area last September, I transferred to urban EMS, where the only monsters I deal with are human ones. The call came in just before midnight on September 22nd. Dispatch said they had reports of multiple injuries at Pine Ridge Rest Area, possible carbon monoxide poisoning affecting several people who were acting confused and disoriented. My partner that night was Lisa Chen, a 15-year veteran who'd seen everything twice. We'd worked together for 3 years, and she had a reputation for staying calm in the worst situations. But when we got to Pine Ridge, even Lisa was rattled. The rest area was packed with people, which was unusual for that time of night. Maybe 30 individuals scattered around the picnic tables and parking areas, all moving in slow, jerky motions like they were sleepwalking. Men, women, children, whole families wandering around in the dark without any apparent purpose. Dispatch, this is Ambulance 7, Lisa called on the radio. We've got a much larger incident than reported, requesting additional units and possible hazmat response. Copy. Ambulance 7. Can you describe the nature of injuries? That's when we realized none of them were actually injured. I approached the nearest group, what appeared to be a family of 4 standing motionless near the vending machines. EMS. We got reports of people needing medical attention. Is everyone feeling all right? The father figure turned to look at me, but his movements were wrong. Too stiff, like his neck had limited range of motion. When he spoke, his voice had an odd echo to it. We are well, he said. We are adjusting to our new forms. The mother and children turned to face me with the same mechanical movement. That's when I noticed their eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire visible portion of the eye. New forms? I asked, trying to process what I was seeing. We were travelers, the woman said in that same echoing voice. Now we are becoming something else. Lisa joined me with the medical kit, but she stopped short when she saw the family up close. Danny, look at their skin. Under the parking lot lights, I could see what she meant. Their skin had a waxy, artificial quality, like it was made from some kind of synthetic material. And there were seams, visible lines running along their arms and faces where pieces had been joined together. Sir, I'm going to need you to sit down so I can check your vital signs, I said, following standard protocol, even though nothing about this was standard. We do not have vital signs, the man replied. We no longer require heartbeats or breathing. To test this, I watched his chest for several minutes. No rise and fall of respiration. I pressed my fingers to his wrist. No pulse. Lisa, we need to call this in as a possible hazmat situation, I said quietly. These people are exhibiting signs of severe poisoning or exposure to some kind of chemical agent. But as I spoke, I was studying the other groups scattered around the rest area. They all had the same waxy skin, the same black eyes, the same stiff mechanical movements, and they were all wearing clothes that looked like they'd been put on by someone who didn't understand how human clothing was supposed to fit. Shirts buttoned wrong, shoes on the wrong feet, pants twisted backward, like costumes being worn by actors who'd never seen humans before. We should examine the children, Lisa suggested, which turned out to be a mistake. When we approached the two smaller figures, they turned toward us with those same mechanical movements, but where adult faces should have been, there were smooth, featureless surfaces. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank skin-colored ovals where faces belonged. "Jesus Christ," Lisa whispered, taking a step backward. "Do not be alarmed," one of the faceless children said, the voice coming from somewhere inside its head. "We are still learning how to appear human. The faces are difficult." That's when I realized we weren't dealing with sick people. We were dealing with something pretending to be people. I grabbed Lisa's arm and started backing toward our ambulance. "We need to leave. Now." But as we moved, all 30 figures turned to watch us with that same synchronized motion I'd seen in the first family. They didn't try to stop us, just observed our retreat with what felt like scientific curiosity. "Do not go," the father figure called out. "We have many questions about human physiology. Your knowledge would be valuable." "We'll send specialists to help you," I called back, which was a lie. I had no idea what kind of specialists you call for something like this. We made it to the ambulance, and Lisa immediately radioed dispatch. "Ambulance 7 to dispatch. We have a major incident at Pine Ridge Rest Area requiring immediate response from law enforcement and possibly federal authorities." "Copy, Ambulance 7. What's the nature of the incident?" Lisa looked at me, clearly struggling with how to report what we'd seen. How do you tell dispatch that 30 people at a rest area have been replaced by something that's learning how to impersonate humans? We have approximately 30 individuals displaying behavior consistent with severe neurological impairment and possible exposure to unknown chemical agents, requesting immediate evacuation and hazmat response. We waited in the ambulance for backup, watching the figures through our windshield. They had returned to their wandering patterns, moving slowly around the rest area in what looked like practice sessions for normal human behavior. Some were attempting to use the picnic tables, sitting down and standing up repeatedly, like they were learning the mechanics of the action. Others were gathered around the vending machines, inserting coins and pressing buttons, but not taking any of the items that dispensed. "Danny, what do you think happened to the real people?" Lisa asked quietly. "I don't know, but I don't think those things killed them. I think they replaced them." State police arrived first, followed by what appeared to be federal agents in unmarked vehicles. We briefed them on what we'd observed, but by the time they approached the rest area, all the figures had vanished. The facility was completely empty except for scattered personal belongings, wallets, phones, car keys, clothing, items that suggested the original people had been there but were now gone. The lead agent, who never identified himself, took our statements and then informed us that our report would be classified under national security protocols. "What we encountered tonight," he said, "represents a threat to public safety that requires specialized containment. Your cooperation in maintaining confidentiality is essential." Lisa and I were given administrative leave while the incident was investigated, but we both knew that meant we were being kept quiet while someone figured out how to handle the situation. 2 weeks later, I transferred to urban EMS in Louisville. The official reason was family considerations, but the truth is, I couldn't continue working routes that might bring me back to Pine Ridge Rest Area. Lisa stayed with rural EMS for another month before she also transferred out. She told me she had had 2 more encounters with groups of people who moved wrong, spoke wrong, and wore human appearance like badly fitting costumes. I don't know what happened to the original families who were at Pine Ridge that night. I don't know where the things that replaced them came from or what they ultimately want, but I know they're still out there, still practicing how to be human, getting better at their disguises every night. If you're traveling through remote areas and you encounter groups of people who seem just a little off, movements too stiff, voices too hollow, clothes that don't fit right, don't stop to help. Don't engage in conversation. And whatever you do, don't let them examine you too closely. They're still learning how we work, and they need live subjects to perfect their imitations. This is Danny Rodriguez, and I'm done working places where things pretend to be people. Maria Gonzalez cleaned rest stops for 8 years, working night shifts when the facilities were supposed to be empty. At the Damascus Rest area in Kentucky, she discovered she wasn't alone, and the visitors she encountered were practicing to infiltrate human society. Most people don't pay attention to the folks who clean rest stops. We're invisible, just part of the background, like the vending machines and hand dryers. That invisibility gave me a front row seat to something that changed everything I thought I knew about what's normal and what isn't. Maria Gonzalez. I spent 8 years cleaning rest stops along Interstate 64 through eastern Kentucky, working the night shift when most travelers are asleep and the facilities are quiet. Night work pays better, and I needed the money for my kids, but it also means you see things that don't happen during daylight hours, things that aren't supposed to happen at all. The Damascus Rest area was my regular assignment, a small facility tucked into a valley where the mountains block most of the sky. During the day, it serves maybe 50 vehicles, but after 11 p.m., it's usually empty, except for the occasional trucker or family traveling overnight. That's when the visitors started showing up. It began in late August with small groups of people who appeared around midnight. Families, couples, sometimes lone travelers. Nothing unusual except they never seemed to use any vehicles. They'd be there when I arrived for my shift, wandering around the picnic area, but the parking lot would be empty. At first I assumed they were dropped off by relatives or maybe hiking through the area, which isn't uncommon in the mountains. I'd nod politely when our paths crossed, do my cleaning work, and they'd be gone by morning. But after a few weeks, I started noticing details that didn't make sense. They wore the same clothes every night, not similar clothes, the exact same outfits, clean and pressed, like they'd never been worn. A woman in a blue floral dress that never showed wrinkles or stains. A man in a white button-down shirt that stayed perfectly crisp. Children in school clothes that never got dirty despite them spending hours outdoors. And they never used the facilities, never went into the restrooms, never bought anything from the vending machines, never sat at the picnic tables. They just walked around in slow circles, like they were patrolling the area. I tried talking to them a few times, basic greetings and offers to help if they needed anything. They'd smile and nod, but their responses were always slightly wrong. Beautiful night, I'd say. Yes, the night has acceptable conditions, they'd reply. The breakthrough came on September 10th when I arrived early for my shift. Instead of finding the usual group already there, I watched them arrive. They didn't walk out of the forest or emerge from hiding places. They materialized. One moment the picnic area was empty. The next moment 6 people were standing there like they'd always been present. I was mopping the men's restroom when it happened, watching through the window. The air seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. And then they were there. The same people I'd been seeing for weeks, wearing the same clothes, taking up their usual wandering patterns. That's when I realized they weren't people at all. I started paying closer attention to their behavior, making mental notes of everything that seemed off about them. They never cast shadows under the parking lot lights. Their feet never made sounds when they walked on gravel. When they spoke to each other, their lips moved, but the voices seemed to come from several feet away. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be studying the rest area itself, examining the building materials, testing door handles, running their hands along walls and fixtures like they were taking measurements. "Excuse me," I asked the woman in the blue dress one night. "Are you folks architects or something? Doing some kind of survey?" She turned to look at me with that same polite smile they all wore. "We are learning about human structures, how you organize spaces for temporary rest. Are you with the highway department?" "We are not with any human organization." That answer should have sent me running, but I was curious now. These beings, whatever they were, didn't seem dangerous. They were polite, quiet, and they cleaned up after themselves, despite never making any mess. "What are you, exactly?" I asked. "We are students," she replied. "We study human behavior and social organization. Rest stops are useful for observation because humans here are between destinations in transitional states." Observation of what? How humans interact when they believe they are unobserved, how they organize spaces, how they respond to isolation and temporary displacement. The way she spoke reminded me of a nature documentary narrator describing animal behavior. Over the following weeks, I became an unofficial subject of their study. They'd ask questions about my work routines, why I cleaned certain areas in specific orders, how I determined when tasks were complete. "You maintain these facilities, but you do not own them," one of the men observed. "Why do you perform labor that benefits strangers?" "It's my job. I get paid to keep the place clean." "But the payment comes from other humans who also do not own these facilities. Why do they compensate you for maintaining something that belongs to a governmental authority?" These conversations revealed how alien their perspective was. They understood individual actions, but not the social systems that connected them. The most unsettling discovery came in late September when I found one of them malfunctioning. I was emptying trash cans around 2 a.m. when I noticed one of the children standing motionless near the vending machines. Not the usual slow walking pattern, but completely still. As I got closer, I could see that something was wrong with its appearance. The child's face was shifting, features melting and reforming, like clay being molded by invisible hands. First it looked like a boy, then a girl, then something in between, then something that wasn't quite human at all. "Are you all right?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what all right meant for whatever these things were. "Form instability," it replied in a voice that was neither male nor female. "Difficulty maintaining consistent human appearance during extended observation periods." The adult figures gathered around the malfunctioning child, forming a circle and making soft humming sounds that seemed to stabilize its appearance. Within minutes, it had settled back into the form of a 10-year-old boy and resumed its wandering pattern. "What exactly are you studying us for?" I asked the woman in the blue dress. "Preparation," she said simply. "Preparation for what?" "Integration. We must understand human social behavior before we can successfully join your communities." "You're planning to live among people? Permanently?" "Some of us will replace humans who will not be missed. Others will assume new identities in locations where additional residents would not be noticed. The process has already begun in several regions." That conversation ended my curiosity about the beings at Damascus Rest Area. The next night, I called in sick, and the night after that, I submitted my resignation to the cleaning company. I told my supervisor I was moving to Florida to care for elderly relatives, but the truth is, I couldn't continue working at a place where non-human entities were practicing to infiltrate human society. Before I left Kentucky, I tried to report what I'd observed to local authorities. The police thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Social services wanted to evaluate my mental health. Nobody believed that beings who could shapeshift were using a mountain rest area as a training facility for human impersonation. I've been in Florida for 4 months now, working day shifts at a truck stop, where the only unusual thing I encounter is the occasional drunk driver. But I still think about those beings and their preparation for integration. How many are there? How long have they been studying us? And most importantly, how many have already succeeded in joining our communities without being detected? I look at people differently now, watching for signs that someone might not be what they appear to be. Movements that are too precise, responses that are slightly off, clothes that never show wear, or stains. If you work night shifts at remote locations, pay attention to regular visitors who don't quite fit normal patterns. If you encounter groups of people who study human behavior, like scientists observing lab animals, don't engage with them more than necessary. And if someone you know starts acting differently, more precise in their movements, more formal in their speech, clothes that always look brand new, consider the possibility that they might not be the same person they used to be. They're getting better at imitating us, but they're not perfect yet. The question is how long we have before their practice makes them undetectable. This is Maria Gonzalez, and I'm staying far away from isolated rest stops from now on. Mike Thompson has driven trucks for 26 years, covering every mile of interstate through the Smoky Mountains. At the Blackwater Rest Area in Tennessee, he learned why some hitchhikers should never be picked up and why one truck driver never made it home. After 26 years hauling freight across the eastern seaboard, you learn to recognize when something's not right. It might be a weird vibration in your rig, an unusual smell, or just that feeling in your gut that tells you to pay attention. But nothing in my experience prepared me for what I encountered at the Blackwater Rest Area in Tennessee last October. Name's Mike Thompson, and I've been driving long haul since I was 22 years old. Seen every mile of Interstate 40 through the Smokies more times than I can count. Know every rest stop, every truck stop, every place to grab a decent cup of coffee between Memphis and Knoxville. The Blackwater Rest Area was always one of my regular stops. Clean facilities, good lighting, usually quiet after midnight when I needed to take my mandatory rest breaks. Never had any trouble there until the night I met the hitchhikers who weren't quite human. October 14th, around 1 a.m., I was running a load of electronics from Nashville to Asheville, making good time despite some weather delays earlier in the day. My logbook showed I needed at least 8 hours of rest before I could legally continue driving, so I pulled into Blackwater to settle in for the night. The parking lot was empty except for one other truck at the far end, driver probably already asleep in his sleeper berth. I backed my rig into a spot near the building, shut down the engine, and was getting ready to climb into my bunk when I heard voices outside. Through my side window, I could see a family of 4 standing near the picnic tables, parents and 2 kids, all carrying what looked like camping gear. Nothing unusual about that. People camp in the national forest all the time, sometimes need to walk out to the highway for supplies or emergencies. The father approached my truck and knocked on the driver's door. I rolled down the window and he looked up at me with what seemed like a friendly smile. "Evening, driver. Sorry to bother you, but we're having some car trouble and need a ride into town. Could you help us out?" Standard hitchhiker request, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. First off, I didn't see any broken down vehicle anywhere in the rest area. Second, the family was carrying camping gear, but they looked too clean, too well groomed for people who'd been hiking in the mountains. "Where's your car?" I asked. "Broke down about 2 miles back on the access road. We walked here hoping to find help." I studied the family more closely in the light from my cab. The parents appeared to be in their 30s, the kids maybe 8 and 10 years old, but there was something off about their proportions. The adults were too tall, maybe 7 feet, but so thin they looked stretched. The children were the right height, but their heads seemed too large for their bodies. "What kind of car trouble are you having?" I asked, stalling, while I tried to figure out what was bothering me about these people. "Engine problems," the woman replied. "It just stopped running and won't start again." Her voice sounded normal, but when she spoke, her lips didn't quite match the timing of the words, like watching a movie where the audio track is slightly out of sync. "I wish I could help," I said, "but company policy prohibits picking up hitchhikers. Insurance liability issues, but I can call a tow truck for you on my CB radio." "That won't be necessary," the man said, and his smile got wider. Too wide. His mouth stretched almost to his ears, showing teeth that were all the wrong shape. "We'll find another way to get where we're going." The family started walking away from my truck, but instead of heading toward the highway or the access road, they walked directly into the forest. Within seconds, they had disappeared completely into the darkness between the trees. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the strange proportions, the weird mouth, the out-of-sync speech. Fatigue can play tricks on your mind after 18 hours on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just avoided some kind of danger. I was settling into my sleeper berth when I heard scratching sounds on the outside of my trailer. Not tree branches or wind, deliberate, rhythmic scratching, like someone running their fingernails along the metal skin of the trailer. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab to investigate. The trailer looked normal, but when I examined the side where I'd heard the scratching, I found marks in the aluminum, deep gouges that spelled out words. "We know you're inside." That's when I noticed the other truck at the end of the parking lot wasn't running its generator. No lights in the cab, no sound of an idling engine or auxiliary power unit. For a driver taking his mandatory rest, that was unusual. We need power for lights, heat, air conditioning. I walked over to check on the other driver, thinking maybe he was having mechanical problems. When I got close enough to see into the cab, my blood went cold. The truck was empty. Keys still in the ignition, logbook open on the dashboard, coffee still warm in a cup holder, but no driver, no personal belongings, no sign of where he'd gone. I was examining the abandoned truck when I heard voices from the forest. Multiple people talking, but the voices were all wrong. Too high-pitched, too fast, overlapping in ways that human speech doesn't overlap. "He saw us," one voice said. "The tall one noticed our proportions," another replied. "Should we take him too?" "No, he didn't get out of his vehicle. The rules say we can only take those who leave their protection willingly." I realized they were talking about me and the missing truck driver. Whatever had happened to him, I'd avoided the same fate by staying in my cab. The voices moved closer to the rest area, and I could see shapes moving between the trees. Tall, thin figures that moved with an unnatural gait, like their joints bent in the wrong directions. Some were carrying what looked like camping gear, Others had bundles that might have been clothing or personal belongings. I got back to my truck as quietly as possible, locked the doors, and started the engine. Federal regulations be damned. I was getting out of there before whatever took the other driver decided to come for me too. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I could see the shapes emerging from the forest. In my mirrors, they looked like people, but people who were too tall, too thin, wearing faces that didn't quite fit properly. I drove straight through to Asheville, called my dispatcher, and reported the abandoned truck at Blackwater Rest Area. I said I was concerned about the driver's welfare, but didn't mention the strange family or the voices in the forest. 2 days later, I got word that the abandoned truck had been found empty, just as I'd described. The driver, Tommy Martinez, was listed as missing. His personal belongings, wallet and cell phone, were found in the forest about a mile from the rest area, along with what appeared to be camping gear that didn't belong to him. The official investigation concluded that Tommy had gone hiking, possibly to relieve stress from long-haul driving, and had gotten lost in the national forest. Search and rescue teams spent a week looking for him without success. I never told anyone the real story about that night at Blackwater. Who would believe that a family of shape-shifting creatures had somehow lured Tommy out of his truck and taken him into the forest? But I started asking other drivers about their experiences at mountain rest areas. Turns out I'm not the only one who's encountered strange hitchhikers with wrong proportions and voices that don't match their mouths. 3 other drivers told me about families who approach truckers at night, always claiming car trouble, always trying to get rides to town. Drivers who refuse the hitchhikers continue their routes without problems. Drivers who try to help them are never seen again. I still drive the same routes through the Smokies, but I don't stop at Blackwater anymore. And when I see hitchhikers at any mountain rest area, I don't roll down my window. Some people aren't what they appear to be, and some requests for help are traps that lead into the deep forest where humans don't come back. This is Mike Thompson, logbook number 7749, and I'm keeping my doors locked from now on. Carl Jensen serviced vending machines across Virginia and North Carolina for 11 years. At the Shenandoah Valley Rest Area, he discovered that some customers aren't interested in buying snacks. They're studying human commerce to learn how our society really works. Working on vending machines isn't glamorous, but it gets you into places most people never see. Rest stops at 3 a.m., office buildings on weekends, schools during summer break, all the spaces where normal activity stops and weird stuff starts happening. I'm Carl Jensen, been servicing vending machines across Virginia and North Carolina for 11 years. Most of the work is routine: restock inventory, fix jammed bill acceptors, replace broken glass. But some locations have problems that don't fit into any service manual. The Shenandoah Valley Rest Area on Interstate 81 was one of those problem locations, not because the machines broke down more often, but because of what I found inside them when I opened them up for maintenance. The first strange thing I noticed was the inventory consumption patterns. Rest areas typically go through predictable amounts of snacks and drinks, heavy usage during peak travel times, almost nothing after midnight. But Shenandoah Valley was different. The machines would be completely empty every time I serviced them, even though the electronic counters showed sales that were mathematically impossible. 300 candy bars sold in a single night at a location that maybe saw 20 vehicles total. Either the counters were malfunctioning or someone was buying enormous quantities of snacks in the middle of the night. Neither explanation made much sense. The breakthrough came in November when I was called out for an emergency repair. The beverage machine was jamming constantly, dispensing multiple products for single purchases. Not unusual for machines with worn mechanisms, but this one was only 6 months old. I arrived at the rest area around 11 p.m., planning to have the repair finished before midnight when the facility typically went quiet. But as I was working on the machine, I could hear voices outside, multiple people talking and moving around the picnic area. Through the glass door, I could see what looked like a large group gathered around the tables, maybe 15 or 20 people, which was unusual for that time of night, but not necessarily problematic. I was replacing a faulty solenoid when I heard the first customer approach the snack machine next to where I was working. Coins dropping into the slot, buttons being pressed, product dispensing, normal vending machine sounds. But when I glanced over, nobody was there. The machine was operating by itself, dispensing candy bars and chips while phantom coins clinked into the cash box. I watched in amazement as the machine went through what appeared to be a normal transaction cycle. Selection buttons lit up, motors whirred, products dropped into the dispensing bin. But there was no customer, no money being inserted, no hand reaching in to collect the items. The phantom customer phenomenon continued for about 10 minutes, both snack and beverage machines operating continuously, dispensing products to invisible buyers. I checked the coin mechanisms and found them completely empty. Whatever was triggering the machines wasn't using real money. That's when I noticed the people outside weren't acting like normal travelers. They moved in synchronized patterns, walking in slow circles around the picnic area, all wearing similar clothing that looked slightly old-fashioned, all maintaining the same spacing between each other like they were following invisible guidelines. Most disturbing of all, none of them had shadows. The parking lot lights were bright enough to cast clear shadows from the trees and building, but the people walking around cast no shadows at all. I finished my repair work as quickly as possible, but as I was packing up my tools, one of the figures approached the building. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a blue dress that looked like it was from the 1950s. She stood in front of the beverage machine, but instead of inserting coins, she just stared at the product selection buttons. The machine responded anyway, lights flashing and motors whirring as it dispensed a soft drink. The woman picked up the drink, opened it, and poured the entire contents on the ground. Then she approached the snack machine and repeated the process, selecting chips that she immediately tore open and scattered across the floor. "Excuse me," I called out. "You need to pay for those items." She turned to look at me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We are practicing commerce, learning how humans exchange resources for goods." "Practicing commerce?" I asked, trying to process what she'd said. "We observe how your species interacts with automated distribution systems. The machines respond to specific inputs, but we do not understand why humans consume these products." She gestured toward the scattered chips and spilled soda. "The items have no nutritional value and contain chemicals that should be harmful to biological systems, yet humans regularly exchange currency for them." "They taste good," I said, which sounded ridiculous even as I spoke. "Taste? Yes, we are studying this concept, but we do not understand why temporary sensory pleasure justifies exchanging resources that required labor to acquire." Our conversation was interrupted when the other figures began gathering around us. Men, women, children, all wearing that same polite smile, all studying me with the intense focus of scientists observing a lab specimen. "You maintain these machines," one of the men said. "You understand their internal mechanisms." "It's my job," I replied cautiously. "But the machines belong to a corporation that compensates you through intermediary payment systems. You do not own the products or receive direct benefit from their distribution. Why do you perform this labor? The question reminded me of conversations with my 5-year-old nephew, technically accurate, but missing all the social context that makes human behavior make sense. We would like to observe your maintenance procedures, the woman said, to understand how humans service mechanical systems that they do not own. My work is finished here, I said, backing toward my service van. I need to get to my next location. There are no other locations requiring service at this hour, one of the children said. Your dispatch records show no additional assignments tonight. That stopped me cold. How could they know my work schedule? My dispatch information wasn't public, and I certainly hadn't mentioned it. How do you know about my assignments? We study human organizational systems, employment patterns, resource distribution networks, communication protocols. Your company's scheduling database was relatively simple to access. I got to my van as quickly as possible without running. As I loaded my tools, I could see the figures returning to their slow circular walking patterns around the rest area. The vending machines continued dispensing products to invisible customers, creating a steady rhythm of mechanical sounds in the quiet mountain night. I reported the incident to my supervisor the next morning, describing the vandalism, but leaving out the part about people who cast no shadows and hacked into company databases. He filed a report with the rest area management about potential security issues. 3 days later, I was reassigned to a different service route. My supervisor said it was a normal rotation, but I noticed that none of the other technicians were willing to service the Shenandoah Valley location. I kept in touch with other vending machine technicians in the region, asking casual questions about unusual incidents at mountain rest areas. Turns out, several of them had encountered similar groups of people who seemed more interested in studying human commerce than actually making purchases. The common elements were always the same: people who moved in coordinated patterns, questions about why humans perform labor they don't directly benefit from, and vending machines that operated without real money being inserted. Most disturbing of all, these groups always seemed to know things about the technicians they encountered: work schedules, personal information, company procedures that weren't publicly available. I don't know what these beings are or where they come from, but they're clearly studying us, learning how our society works, how we organize labor and commerce, how we interact with automated systems. If you work night shifts servicing equipment in remote locations, pay attention to customers who ask too many questions about why you do your job. If you encounter people who seem more interested in studying human behavior than actually using the services they're paying for, don't engage in conversation. And if machines start operating by themselves while groups of people watch from the shadows, finish your work as quickly as possible and leave. They're learning about us, but I'm not sure we want them to succeed. This is Carl Jensen, and I'm sticking to daylight service calls from now on. Those were 6 true accounts from people who've encountered entities in the Appalachian Mountains that defy explanation. Maintenance workers, police officers, medical personnel, security guards, credible individuals with years of experience who've witnessed something that official reports will never acknowledge. But here's what I want you to do right now. First, tell me in the comments, which story disturbed you the most? Which encounter would have terrified you beyond your ability to handle it? Second, share this video with anyone who travels mountain highways at night. These testimonies could save someone from making the same mistakes that led to encounters with beings that look human but definitely aren't. And finally, if you work night shifts at remote locations, rest stops, gas stations, truck stops, Pay attention to visitors who seem just a little bit wrong. Trust your instincts. Some people aren't what they appear to be. Subscribe for more true horror stories from people who've encountered things that shouldn't exist. And remember, the mountains have been here far longer than we have, and some of their original inhabitants are still watching us from the shadows. Stay safe out there, and never travel the mountain highways alone after dark. Until next time, this has been your guide through the darkest corners of America's forgotten places.